Welcome back, folks, to another edition of the Late Night Review. And tonight, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite movies of all time, a movie that I have a ton of nostalgia for, and beyond that, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1. This is the classic by Wes Craven. It's a movie that I saw when I was 7. 1984, they took me to see it at the theater. And, probably not the best thing to take a 7-year-old to see a movie like that, but I enjoyed it. And it's been one of my favorites ever since. And get this, I was 7, and the first film, it was starting to get dark. The first film that came on, it was a double feature. First film that came on was this one, A Nightmare on Elm Street, the original, with Robert Englund, Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon, directed by the great Wes Craven. This was on first. And the Late Late Show was The Evil Dead with Bruce Campbell was on the Late Show, the original Evil Dead, directed by Sam Raimi. Another one of my favorites. Maybe I'll do a review of that in the future. I'm not sure, but really, I had a really good time, and a lot of nostalgia plays into my rating here. But even if you took all the nostalgia away, this would be a great film still. I mean, the way it's shot, the cinematography, the score, the story. What an original story. And it's kind of hard to believe that Wes Craven had a hard time finding people who wanted to do this film and produce it. And because what a story. The killer is in your dreams, and if you die in the dream, you die in real life. He's in the shadows, he's in your dream, and if you fall asleep, he can get you. What a concept. What a concept. And of course, he talked about people coming from war-torn, maybe like Cambodia and certain places in Asia where they witnessed a lot of, like Southeast Asia and other areas where they had a lot of war and conflict, and they would have nightmares. And they were immigrants coming to the United States. And Wes Craven said articles there were articles and they weren't connected together. There was no correlation made by I think it was the LA Times. If I remember right, I'd have to see the interview with Wes Craven again, but he said there are articles in the LA Times, I believe, that talked about these kids from these regions where they had conflict, and which you can imagine, coming from that part of the world, especially around the time of the killing fields and Pol Pot and all these horrible things. Um, they came here, they had nightmares, and a few of them died in their sleep. They were sure that something was out there to get them. They were sure that their dreams, their nightmares were dangerous, and someone or something was after them. And a few of them died. I don't know how many, but a few of them died. And that's one of the inspirations behind the Nightmare on Elm Street story. Wes Craven talked about it. There's numerous interviews of him on YouTube, and he mentions it quite a bit. And that, with that background alone, you can imagine the framework and the frame of reference that you have with this film. And it's scary, it's creative. And another thing about it too, as I mentioned earlier, the way it's shot, I just love, there's so many scenes in here I love, but I really love that scene where Heather Langenkamp, and there another scene where Robert Englund's coming out of the wall, and that's one of my favorite scenes too. But the other scene too, where Heather Langenkamp, Nancy, is dreaming, and she tells Johnny Depp to watch her, wake her up if she notices, or if he notices anything unusual, or she's having a nightmare. Wake her up. But she goes outside. She steps off her parents' front porch and walks through the neighborhood. Then that music starts. It's really beautiful music, actually. And then you have the trees, you have the mist. I like how the mist is above the trees and around the trees. You can see a little light coming through around these dark trees, along with that score when she's walking. I think it's actually really beautiful, and I think that it's scary, it's creepy, but the way the trees look and the way the score is, it's fascinating. It's really intriguing. There's so many parts of this movie that I like. And of course, the other scene where Robert Englund comes out of the wall, and then Heather Langenkamp is below. She's in bed, and then Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger, is coming out of the wall, and then she starts to wake up, and then he starts to go back into the wall, and then you hear that the sound of him coming in and out of the wall. He goes back in, and then she puts the crucifix for protection on the wall. I really like that scene, and there's so many other scenes, and of course at the end when she goes down into the boiler room to try to get him, and it's like going down into Hades, going down into hell. You know, there's a lot of symbolism in this movie. There's a lot of I think there's archetypes too, and this might sound a little strange, a little weird, but to me, for some reason, with Freddy Krueger's hat, the way he looked, and when I watched as a kid and later too, when I watched Wizard of Oz, the witch in there and the character of Freddy Krueger, you know, with the hat and the way they talked and the way they had their personalities, to me there was some kind of archetype. There was something about the two characters that reminded uh, me of them. When I'd watch Nightmare on Elm Street, I think about the witch. When I watched The Wizard of Oz, I think about Freddy Krueger, and vice versa. And then that one scene where Nancy is walking through the hallway, and she's running through the hallway because she saw the corpse of Tina in the body bag going down the hallway, and she runs after it. Then she runs into that girl, and the girl says no running in the hallway, and she has the Freddy Krueger claw. She reminds me of the witch also in A Wizard of Oz. So there's certain things there. There's atmospheres and archetypes and symbols in both movies that remind me of both movies, if that makes sense. And there is such a enchantment about the fact that dreams are involved, and the fact that anything can happen in a dream. And you got that beautiful scene with Johnny Depp and Heather Langenkamp on the bridge, and he's telling her about the Balinese system of dreaming. They wake up and write their dreams down. They get their art and literature from. I don't know. I've never looked into it. I don't know how much of that is true. I've never actually studied it. But when he was telling her that, and then you have that nice background music with it, this movie is a pretty well-rounded movie. Not too disturbing, not too it's not too disturbing where it's not entertaining anymore. It's one of those movies that is just about right for me. It strikes the right, you know, it's scary, it's disturbing. I don't like the remake. I'm not going to do a review of the remake. I think it sucks. The only thing I'll say about the remake is I tried to watch it 3 times, and I think it was cast pretty well. I think you had some talented people working on it, but when I was younger and even later, when I was watching Nightmare on Elm Street, the character of Freddy Krueger, even though he was a child killer, and you know, you know his background and all that stuff, and it's horrible, it's disgusting, it's awful, but they presented him like the troll under the bridge that was, you know, it's like a fairy tale, or like Hansel and Gretel, which the new Nightmare 7, kind of plays into that with the breadcrumbs and then the sleeping pills and all that. But that's another one of my favorite movies. But Nightmare on Elm Street 1, you have Freddy Krueger kind of presented as this goblin under the bridge, this creature after you, kind of in a fun way. But with the remake, they focused on the pedophilia stuff and all that crap. That really turned me off. It turned Freddy Krueger from this kind of mythological character that you would see in a Grimm's fairy tale to some sick pervert, and please give us Charles Bronson to blow him away, or Clint Eastwood. You know, that's how I felt it. It just took the enjoyment out of the movie for me when they focused on that angle. To me, it's kind of sick. And I couldn't, and not only that, that was one of my problems with the movie. It just, you can't replace the first one, and you can't replace Robert Robert Englund or Heather Langenkamp. It's just, this movie was really well done. I think it's a horror classic. Most people have seen it, so, but if some chance you haven't seen it, you know, I would recommend it. You know, buy it, rent it. I think it's a very, very well done movie. I love the neighborhood, just like with Halloween. I really like the neighborhood. I think it was very well chosen. I like the trees. I like the houses, and I think because as an artist, certain movies, if they don't look good to me, or if the territory kind of, I'm kind of bored with the atmosphere, the territory, the settings, the art direction, that can bring the rating way down for me. But this, it just goes up. It's an enchanting horrible or horrible excuse me, an enchanting movie. It's got horror, it's got scary parts, it's got fun parts. The score is very well done. It's interesting, and I would highly recommend it. And it's my favorite of the franchise. Nightmare 1 is my favorite of the Nightmare on Elm Streets. And actually, I like part 2 as well. I've always liked 3 and 4. When I was a kid, part 3 and 4 were my favorites, but I always kept going back to the first one. As I've gotten older, and I've always liked part 2. I was never a person who just dismissed part 2 as just one of the worst. I don't like it. It's always been one of my favorites. It's just, it always, I love the school bus scene at the end, and some of my, a little bit of my art was inspired by that a little bit. And one of the things I like about part 2, I might do a review of that one in the future because it is one of my favorites. The neighborhood is pretty much the same. The house, and since part 1's my favorite, why wouldn't I like the settings in part 2? So part 2, and it's also a darker version of Freddy, which is, it's dark where you don't get turned off by the character. It actually makes it a little bit more exciting and dangerous. Actually, the way they did it, they could have done it a different way where you're turned off by the character, but the way they did it, to me, it was more intriguing. So yeah, part 2 has always been one of my favorites, and it's actually grown on me over time to the point where 3 and 4 used to be my favorites. I've always gone back to the first one, so nowadays part 1's my favorite, and part 7, The New Nightmare. 1, 7, and 2 are sometimes in a battle for my number 1, but part 1 is normally my number 1. 3 and 4 is still one of my favorites. And I actually don't mind Freddy's Dead. I know a lot of people don't like that, but they actually use the witch a little bit as an inspiration for one of the scenes in Freddy's Dead. And one of the reasons I don't have a problem with Freddy's Dead is because I wasn't left wondering, why is this movie so slow? It's not entertaining. It's dragging on. It wasn't. It was a pretty fast-paced movie. Part 5, I liked it when it first came out, The Dream Child, but later I didn't like it so much. Why? Because I thought it dragged on too much. But Freddy's Dead, The New Nightmare, yes, it's kind of Looney Tunes. Yes, it's not as dark, which I appreciated in part 2 that they had the dark Freddy. But the Freddy's Dead didn't bother me that much because it was not slow. If your movie entertains me, it goes way up in my rating. So the reason I don't mind it that much is because it wasn't, and I actually like it better than The Dream Child just because it wasn't as slow. You can't say that movie was slow. It was a pretty fast pace. I had a fun time. Yes, Freddy wasn't as dark, but it contains Freddy's, Robert Englund's personal favorite kill of the whole franchise, which is the hearing aid kill. That's his favorite, from what I heard, saw in an interview. That's actually his favorite kill in the whole franchise, was the hearing aid one. And I felt sorry for the kid, but I thought the movie was pretty good. But anyway, part 1's my favorite, much better than Freddy's Dead. It's my favorite, and along with part 7 and part 2, still love 3 and 4. But yeah, part 1, if you haven't seen it by some chance, check it out. And this has been the Late Night Review. Please like and subscribe, share this video, and take care, everybody, and have a good night.